Welcome to the Stoic Tide. Have you ever wished you could wake up stronger, calmer, and more in control of your life without having to do anything? What if I told you that while you sleep, your mind could be training itself to become wiser, more resilient, and completely unshakable? You see, most people don't realize that the thoughts they go to bed with shape their entire life. If you fall asleep with stress, anxiety, or regret, your brain absorbs it like a sponge. But if you fill your mind with wisdom before bed, if you allow the greatest minds in history to whisper powerful Stoic lessons into your subconscious, you don't just sleep, you transform. It's strange, isn't it? We spend hours trying to fix things during the day, but we forget the most powerful hours happen at night, when your conscious mind lets go and your subconscious takes over. The Stoics understood this long before science confirmed it. Marcus Aurelius didn't become one of the most disciplined minds in history by chance. His strength came from intentional thought, quiet reflection, and the discipline to guide his mind before it drifted. They knew if you don't program your mind, the world will do it for you, and it rarely programs you for peace. This is your chance to take back control, to stop waking up with the same emotional weight you carried into bed. Because if your last thoughts at night are filled with clarity, strength, and timeless wisdom, then your mornings will meet you with a mind that's already trained to lead, not react. A mind that doesn't get pulled by chaos but moves with purpose. And if what we're doing here speaks to you, if it helps even just a little, there's a small but powerful way you can help keep this going. Just hit the subscribe button. No pressure. It's free, takes 1 second, and it's the kind of support that really matters. Now let's go deeper into the part no one talks about. What happens inside your mind when the world gets quiet, and how that stillness might just be the key to changing your entire life. Even when your eyes are closed and your body is still, your mind is wide awake. This is something most people overlook. They believe that sleep is simply a break from the chaos of the day, a time when everything shuts down. But the truth is the mind never truly rests. It slows, it quiets, it softens its volume. But beneath the surface it keeps working. It listens, it processes, it absorbs. And what it absorbs during those final moments before sleep, the thoughts, emotions, and beliefs you bring with you into the night, can shape everything you think and feel the next day. This is not poetic exaggeration. This is how the brain works. The subconscious is always awake. While your conscious mind shuts off, your subconscious continues to record, organize, and reinforce whatever patterns you've most recently fed it. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That's the core of this truth. If you don't take an active role in shaping your inner world, it will be shaped by default, by fear, by old memories, by whatever chaos you left unresolved. Most people go to bed carrying the weight of the day, unknowingly handing it over to the subconscious to be woven deeper into their mental framework. They wonder why they wake up anxious or unmotivated, without realizing they've rehearsed those feelings in silence while they slept. But here's the power in that truth. If the mind doesn't sleep, it can be trained. You don't need to be awake to rewire the way you think. You just need to be intentional about what you let into your mind before it enters its most absorbent state. This is where the opportunity lives. Not in forcing change during the day, but in preparing for it while the world is quiet and your mind is open. It's during this window, in the space between wakefulness and sleep, that your thoughts have the most impact. Aristotle believed that we are what we repeatedly do. Extend that idea beyond action into thought and you realize we also become what we repeatedly think. Repetition creates pathways in the brain. The more a thought is rehearsed, the stronger it becomes. If you're constantly feeding your mind worries before bed, that worry becomes your baseline. But if you feed your mind strength, perspective, and timeless wisdom, those become the thoughts that shape your perception of the world. The brain doesn't discriminate between what's good or bad for you. It just strengthens whatever it receives most often. The Stoics knew this before science had words for it. They believed in nightly reflection, not to punish themselves, but to purify the mind. Marcus Aurelius in his Meditations wrote to himself as a reminder to stay disciplined in thought. The things you think about determine the quality of your mind. Your soul takes on the color of your thoughts. This wasn't philosophy for the sake of sounding wise. It was a strategy, a daily, deliberate training of the mind so that even while resting it would remain aligned with virtue. The way you speak to yourself before bed matters. It's easy to dismiss the internal chatter as harmless, but the mind listens. A small self-critical thought whispered before sleep can echo for hours, imprinting itself deeper. The same goes for your doubts, your frustrations, the unresolved moments you carry into the dark. If you bring them into bed, your mind takes them seriously. It begins solving problems that don't need solving. It creates fears out of hypotheticals, and slowly, quietly, it starts to rewrite the lens through which you see your life. But here's what most people never realize. You can interrupt that process. You can guide the mind even in its silent hours. The key is to choose what you repeat. This isn't about reciting forced affirmations or pretending everything is fine. It's about choosing thoughts that hold truth, depth, and power. It's about reinforcing ideas that remind your mind of what you already know deep down, like the fact that you don't have to react to every emotion. That fear is not fact. That peace isn't found in the absence of challenge, but in how you face it. Plato once said, "The first and greatest victory is to conquer yourself." That battle doesn't only happen during daylight. It continues in the dark, in the quiet, when you're alone with your thoughts. That's when the real conditioning takes place. And if you don't seize that time, it seizes you. You start each morning already behind, carrying thoughts that aren't even new, just recycled from the night before. You're not tired because you didn't rest. You're tired because your mind rehearsed chaos while your body tried to recover. When you take charge of what your mind consumes before sleep, you change the foundation you stand on when you wake. And it doesn't have to be complex. A single line of wisdom repeated with conviction can carry more weight than hours of silent overthinking. The mind responds to what is repeated, not what is true, not what is best, just what is repeated. That's why even negative beliefs can feel real, not because they're accurate, but because they've been rehearsed for so long. This is why training the mind must be done when it's most receptive. Right before sleep, your conscious resistance is down. The filter that normally separates surface thoughts from deep beliefs is more relaxed. What you repeat slips more easily into the subconscious. If that repetition is grounded in clarity and reason, it strengthens your mental core. But if it's based in fear or regret, it leaves you more vulnerable to spiraling cycles that feel impossible to escape. There's no need to wait until morning to reset. Reset starts before you close your eyes. The body will rest regardless. But the mind that has to be guided, that has to be given direction. Socrates said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." That includes the hours we pretend not to live, our time in sleep. If you never examine what you take into that silence, you'll be ruled by patterns you don't even recognize. So reprogramming isn't about force. It's about attention. It's about asking, what do I want to reinforce? What do I want my mind to carry into tomorrow? The brain can't distinguish between thoughts that are intentional and thoughts that are impulsive. It just responds. That's why the 5 minutes before sleep matter more than the 5 hours that follow. That's when the script is handed to the subconscious. That's when you decide what version of yourself wakes up. You don't need perfection to start. You don't need to be fearless or wise. You just need to feed the mind a better pattern. Start small. One sentence, one idea, one truth that you want to live by. Repeat it, let it sink in. Let it replace the noise. Your mind is listening even when you aren't. And the more you guide it with wisdom, the more it begins to think in alignment with who you truly are. Not who you were yesterday, but who you've chosen to become. And that choice, though it feels quiet, is one of the loudest things you'll ever do. It shapes your reactions. It shifts your confidence. It becomes the way you carry yourself through the world. Because every person you admire, the calm ones, the disciplined ones, the grounded ones, they weren't born that way. They trained for it. Not just in front of others, not just when life demanded it, but when it was dark and quiet and no one was watching. That's when real change happens. When no one's looking. When the world is silent, when the mind is yours and yours alone to shape, and that's where your power lives, in what you choose to think. When the day is done, the thoughts you fall asleep with are not just echoes of the day. They are blueprints for who you become. Every night, without realizing it, you carry the weight of certain feelings, ideas, and beliefs into your sleep. These things don't just fade into the darkness. They settle into you. They settle into your nervous system, your habits, your sense of self. You may think sleep is a break, a time out from everything going on, but your mind doesn't treat it that way. It processes, it stores, it absorbs. So when you lie in bed with resentment in your chest or failure on repeat in your mind, you're not just suffering in the moment. You're shaping your identity around those thoughts. This is why it's so important to be conscious of what you carry with you into sleep. Because it's not just about what happened that day. It's about what you choose to hold on to. Letting something sit in your mind for hours, especially during the most vulnerable moments before you drift off, gives it power. And the mind doesn't care whether that power builds you or breaks you. It just follows instructions. Aristotle once said, We are what we repeatedly do. But you could just as easily say we are what we repeatedly think, especially when those thoughts are left alone, unchecked at night. Most people go to sleep replaying conversations, doubting their decisions or worrying about tomorrow. They don't even realize they're rehearsing their own suffering. They think they're just reflecting or venting or processing, but what's really happening is reinforcement. Every time you repeat a painful memory or let your mind spiral around an anxious thought, you're reinforcing a version of yourself, one rooted in fear, regret, or helplessness. And when that version of you becomes familiar, your nervous system adopts it as normal. That's why you wake up tired even after 8 hours, because mentally you never stopped carrying the weight. Plato taught that the soul becomes like that which it contemplates. If you end your day dwelling on defeat or bitterness, your soul adjusts itself to match. You wake up slightly more tense, more guarded, more reactive, and you don't know why. But if you end your day contemplating peace, strength, or truth, you wake up just a little clearer, a little calmer. Not because the world changed, but because you did. Because the night gave you a chance to re-enter and you took it. Think about how many times you've gone to bed thinking about someone who hurt you, or a situation that made you feel small. How many times you've fallen asleep in the grip of comparison or shame, wondering if you're enough. These thoughts don't just vanish overnight. They settle deeper. Carl Jung warned that what you resist not only persists but will grow in size. So when you resist your emotions instead of meeting them with understanding, they don't disappear, they follow you. They shape how you speak, how you make decisions, how you see yourself. But there's another way. There's a quieter, more powerful approach, one that requires discipline, not denial. It starts with asking yourself one thing before bed. What am I choosing to carry into tomorrow? Because make no mistake, that's what's happening. You are not just ending a day. You're preparing the next one. The emotions you allow to marinate in silence become the background music for your morning thoughts, your habits, your moods. And when repeated, they form the inner script that plays unconsciously throughout your life. This is why the Stoics practiced nightly introspection, not to dwell but to clear, to examine without judgment, to let go of what didn't serve their virtue, and reinforce what did. Marcus Aurelius would write to himself each evening, reminding his mind to stay aligned with reason, with justice, with calm. He wasn't trying to be perfect. He was trying to be intentional, to make sure the thoughts he brought to bed would not lead him further from the person he was trying to become. You don't have to fix everything before you sleep. That's not the goal. You just have to be aware. Awareness alone is enough to begin shifting the pattern. When you become conscious of what you're rehearsing, you create a gap, a moment to decide whether this is something worth taking into the night with you. And in that moment, you have power. You can release. You can replace. You can choose a thought that strengthens you instead of one that weakens you. And slowly that choice becomes who you are. The identity you build isn't created through grand gestures or once-in-a-lifetime moments. It's built through the repeated quiet choices you make when no one's watching, especially when you're alone with your mind. Especially right before sleep, when you're most honest, most vulnerable. That's where real change begins. Not in the chaos of the day, but in the stillness of the night, when you get to decide, what am I feeding my subconscious? Socrates said, the secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. Let that be your anchor. Let that guide how you close your day. Don't fall into the trap of reliving every mistake, every awkward moment, every unkind word. That isn't healing. That's mental self-harm disguised as reflection. Healing happens when you stop feeding the loop and start choosing a different story. When you decide not to carry shame but clarity, not resentment but understanding, not anxiety but faith. And no, this doesn't mean pretending everything is fine. It means holding your pain with compassion instead of judgment. It means telling yourself, yes, today was hard, but I don't have to bring that hardness into my rest. It means reminding yourself that growth isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as whispering a better thought to yourself and letting it echo through the silence of sleep. The mind remembers what it's told. Most often it believes what you repeat. So the most powerful thing you can do is train it to believe in your ability to rise, to handle difficulty, to stay grounded no matter what the world throws at you. Not because you forced yourself to believe it during the day, but because you rehearsed it in the quiet when the world was gone, and only you remained. That version of you, the one that carries peace instead of panic, the one that chooses wisdom over worry, doesn't come from luck. It comes from what you carry to bed and what you let go of before you close your eyes. At night, the world goes silent, but your mind speaks louder. Without the noise of conversations, responsibilities, or distractions, your thoughts finally have the stage all to themselves. And that's exactly when your deepest beliefs, your real fears, and the stories you've been telling yourself rise to the surface. What most people don't realize is that this quiet isn't just background noise. It's programming. It's in these final moments before sleep that your mind is most open, most sensitive, and most likely to accept whatever you feed it. And what it accepts becomes the foundation of your reality the next day. During sleep, your conscious guard drops. Your subconscious mind, the part of you that drives 95% of your thoughts, feelings, and decisions, goes to work. It doesn't judge. It doesn't question. It just absorbs and repeats. If you go to sleep thinking you're not good enough, that thought doesn't just vanish by morning. It lingers. It affects how you interpret people's reactions. It influences how confident you feel, how willing you are to take risks, how you talk to yourself when something doesn't go your way. Sleep doesn't reset the mind, it reinforces it. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That's exactly what happens with nighttime thoughts. They become the script your subconscious runs on. And because most people never question that script, they wake up and walk through the day unknowingly acting out last night's doubts. They wonder why they keep falling into the same emotional patterns, the same cycles of overthinking or avoidance. But the answer was planted the night before, quietly, consistently, invisibly. The Stoics believed that control begins in the mind, not in the world. And the most overlooked place to practice that control is right before you fall asleep. It's easy to think that your day starts in the morning, but in reality it begins the night before. The tone of your day is set by the last few thoughts you allow to settle into your nervous system. That's the soil. And whatever you plant there, worry, hope, bitterness, gratitude, that's what will grow when the sun comes up. If you sleep in stress, you wake up in survival mode. Your brain is already scanning for threats, already looking for what might go wrong. You become reactive instead of grounded. You carry that tension into conversations, into decisions, even into your posture. On the other hand, if you sleep in peace, even if everything in your life isn't perfect, you start your day with a steadier foundation. You don't need everything to be okay. You just need your inner world to be clear enough not to distort the way you see the outer one. Plato wrote that the beginning is the most important part of the work, and your day begins long before your alarm clock. It begins with what you let echo in your mind as you drift off. So if you're filling that time with social media, news, or mental loops of regret, don't be surprised when your morning feels heavy. You're not broken. You're just following the emotional trail you left for yourself the night before. And it's not just about positive thinking or saying affirmations. It's about aligning with thoughts that are true, thoughts that pull you toward your better nature, like I'm allowed to let go of what I can't control, or this setback doesn't define me, or even just I made it through today, and I'm still here. These aren't fantasies. They're truths we forget in the noise of the day, but remember in the quiet of the night, if we give ourselves the chance. Socrates once urged his students to care more for the soul than for the body. But how many of us care for our soul before bed? We brush our teeth. We set our alarms, but we don't cleanse the mind. We don't pause to check what stories we're about to reinforce. And then we wonder why life feels like it's happening to us instead of through us. But it's not fate. It's habit. It's repetition. It's letting old thoughts run the show because we never chose new ones before the curtain closed. This is why reflection at night matters. Not for guilt or shame, but for clarity. You ask yourself, what am I holding on to that doesn't serve me anymore? And even if you don't have all the answers, just asking that question opens the door. It tells your subconscious, I'm willing to grow. I'm willing to see this differently. And that willingness is powerful. Because change doesn't need perfection. It needs intention. When you go to sleep carrying peace, you wake up with power. Not power over other people, but power over your own mind. The power to respond instead of react. The power to stay grounded when others are chaotic. The power to choose your next step even when fear is whispering in your ear. That kind of strength doesn't come from willpower alone. It comes from planting the right thoughts during the hours no one sees. The reality you live tomorrow is being written by the thoughts you entertain tonight. That's not a warning. It's a gift because it means you're not stuck. You're not doomed to repeat the same emotional stories. You can intervene. You can rewrite one thought at a time, one night at a time. The mind never stops working. So give it something worth working with. That's the hidden power of nighttime. Not just to rest, but to realign. Not just to escape, but to evolve. If you let that truth in, really let it in, you'll stop treating sleep like an end and start treating it like a beginning. Overthinking wears a clever disguise. It shows up looking like concern, preparation, responsibility. It tells you you're just being thorough, that you're making sure nothing goes wrong. But behind that mask, overthinking is quietly draining your energy and confidence. It pretends to protect you while secretly imprisoning you inside a mental loop with no exit. What seems like reflection is actually rumination. Thoughts spinning in circles, never landing anywhere useful. Reflection helps you grow. It brings clarity, acceptance, and sometimes resolution. But overthinking, it keeps you stuck. You replay the same conversation, analyzing every word. You predict disasters that haven't happened. You create arguments in your head that you never actually have. It's mental noise, not mental clarity. And the more time you spend there, the harder it becomes to trust yourself. Because now every decision is filtered through fear. Aristotle taught that the energy of the mind is the essence of life. That energy, when wasted on repetitive, unproductive thinking, leaves you drained before you've even started your day. You wake up already behind, already worried, already rehearsing conversations or outcomes that may never come. That isn't clarity. That's cognitive exhaustion dressed up as responsibility. The danger of overthinking is that it feels productive. You think you're solving something. You believe that if you can just figure it out now at 2 a.m. in the dark, half asleep, you'll be at peace. But peace doesn't come from control. It comes from trust. It comes from letting your thoughts pass like clouds rather than trying to grab each one and examine it under a microscope. Not everything requires analysis. Not every feeling deserves your full attention. Carl Jung warned, "What you resist not only persists but will grow in size." That's what overthinking does. It amplifies the very thing you're trying to resolve. You start with one small worry and within minutes it grows teeth. Suddenly your mind is racing through every failure, every rejection, every fear. You're no longer thinking. You're reacting to imagined scenarios your body now treats as real. There's a subtle but crucial difference between awareness and obsession. Reflection asks, "What can I learn from this?" Overthinking asks, "What could go wrong with this?" Reflection opens a window. Overthinking shuts a door and traps you inside. It leads to self-doubt, hesitation, and often paralysis. You end up avoiding action altogether because no option feels safe anymore. And so, ironically, the fear you are trying to prevent, failure, rejection, regret, becomes more likely because you're too frozen to move. The Stoics had no patience for this kind of mental indulgence. Epictetus taught that it's not things that disturb us but our judgments about them. Overthinking is the habit of misjudgment. You assume the worst. You give weight to possibilities instead of facts. You respond not to what is but to what might be. And in doing so, you create your own suffering. So how do you stop? Not by force. Not by yelling at yourself to just relax. That never works. The key is to gently shift the mind's focus. First you observe. You say, "I see this thought. I don't have to follow it." And then you redirect, maybe to your breath, maybe to a mantra, maybe to a single grounding truth like, "I don't need to solve everything right now." One powerful practice is categorizing your thoughts. When something arises, ask yourself, is this useful? If it's something you can act on, something within your control, it's worth keeping. If it's outside your control or based on fear, let it go. Don't argue with it. Don't try to suppress it. Just don't give it fuel. Marcus Aurelius, even as emperor, reminded himself that you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Overthinking happens when we reverse that. When we try to control outside events with our mind. When we believe that thinking hard enough will protect us from pain. But pain is part of life and thinking about it endlessly won't prevent it. It just brings it forward before it even arrives. Reflection is a flashlight. Overthinking is a strobe light. One helps you see, the other blinds you. The goal isn't to stop thinking. It's to think better, to choose thoughts that serve you, that guide you, that calm you. Let your mind rest. Let it process without interference. Your subconscious is wise. It knows what to do if you'll just stop interrupting it with noise. Before bed, this matters even more because your mind doesn't turn off when you sleep. It continues to process whatever you last gave it. If you feed it fear, it will echo fear all night. If you feed it clarity, it will settle. That's not philosophy. That's neuroscience. Your brain consolidates memories and emotions while you sleep. What you think about at night becomes your emotional reality by morning. That's why overthinking at night is one of the most damaging habits you can carry. It poisons the subconscious. It keeps your nervous system activated. It denies your body and mind the chance to repair. And when repeated often enough, it becomes a default setting. You stop being a thinker and start being a worrier. That identity shift happens quietly, almost unnoticeably, but it changes everything. But here's the truth most people miss. You are not your thoughts. You are the one watching them. You can step back. You can listen without obeying. You can choose not to follow every story your mind spins. That's where real power begins. Not in thinking more, but in thinking less and with more intention. Overthinking isn't intelligence. It's hesitation. It's a symptom of fear, or dressed up as logic. And once you recognize that, you can start creating space between you and your thoughts. You can say, not now, not this thought, not tonight. And that small moment of distance, that's freedom. That's clarity. That's the beginning of breaking the cycle of self-sabotage and stepping into a life led by intention rather than anxiety. Not because you've silenced your mind, but because you've learned how to guide it. The Stoics understood something about sleep that most of us have completely forgotten. Sleep isn't just physical rest, it's mental preparation. It's not just about closing your eyes and shutting off your body. It's about what you carry into the darkness and how that shapes who you become when the light returns. They saw sleep as a sacred transition, a daily death of sorts where your mind sheds the noise of the day and prepares to rise wiser, calmer, and more in control. In the modern world, though, we treat it like a pause button, a passive activity, something we do after we've drained every ounce of our attention, scrolling, worrying, racing to fit more into a day that already demands too much. But to the Stoics, sleep wasn't an escape. It was an opportunity, a time when the soul could return to itself. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive." But that insight wasn't born in the morning. It was prepared the night before in silence, in reflection, in stillness. He believed in ending each day with thought, with gratitude, and with inner review, not to punish the self but to purify it. Because if you don't clear your mind before you rest, you carry that mental clutter into tomorrow. And cluttered minds don't create clear lives. Modern life is obsessed with sleep hacks, blue light filters, weighted blankets, apps that play ocean waves on loop. But the Stoics didn't need tricks. They practiced presence, detachment, and most importantly, self-discipline. They knew that how you enter sleep shapes how you wake up. They prepared their minds like a warrior sharpens their sword before battle. They didn't fall asleep to avoid life. They used it to master it. Seneca warned against going to bed without examining the day. He'd ask himself, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? What can I do better tomorrow? This wasn't guilt-driven. It was driven by growth, by a desire to live more intentionally, not just exist reactively. He wrote, as long as you live, keep learning how to live. That learning doesn't stop when the sun goes down. In fact, it begins there. Because here's the truth. Your mind is still active while you sleep. Science now confirms what the Stoics intuited centuries ago. The brain organizes information, processes emotion, and even rehearses responses to future challenges all while you sleep. So whatever emotional state or mental content you bring into that space, your brain treats as important. If you sleep angry, anxious, or scrolling through chaos, your brain stores that emotional tone, and you wake up already shaped by it. This is why Stoics practiced evening reflection, not because it was cute or spiritual, but because it was strategic. They understood that what you rehearse becomes who you are. And if your final thoughts before sleep are thoughts of fear, comparison, regret, or shallow stimulation, you're training your subconscious to normalize that chaos. Plato believed the soul was divided into three parts: the rationale, the spirited, and the appetitive. And when those were in harmony, a person could live with virtue. But when they were in conflict, inner suffering followed. Nighttime for the Stoics was a time to restore that inner harmony, to remind the rational part of its power, to calm the emotional storms, to quiet the cravings of the body, and bring everything back to center. So the next day, you didn't have to fight yourself. You could just be yourself. But what have we done instead? We've turned bedtime into a battleground. Screens blast us with images. Our thoughts spiral through worries we can't control. We replay conversations, imagine worst-case scenarios, and let external noise seep into the most vulnerable space of the day. We don't prepare for rest. We collapse into it, hoping for peace without actually creating it. The Stoics would have found that tragic because to them, sleep was a ritual of power, not weakness. It was a time to reconnect with nature's rhythm, to remember that we are not machines meant to run 24/7, but humans built to cycle between action and renewal. Nature does nothing in vain, Aristotle wrote, and that includes sleep. It's not wasted time. It's necessary time. If you use it well, it doesn't just heal your body, it refines your mind. Carl Jung once said, Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. What you feed your unconscious before bed becomes the foundation of your waking life. That's why the Stoics guarded the gate to their sleep. They didn't allow anything to enter lightly. They chose their final thoughts with care because they knew those thoughts would echo long after the eyes closed. So maybe it's time to stop treating sleep like a shutdown and start treating it like a ceremony. A daily rite of passage from one version of yourself to the next. You can fill that space with fear or with philosophy, with mindless content or with timeless wisdom. The choice is yours. But what you choose will shape more than just your dreams. It will shape your discipline, your energy, your emotional resilience, all the things that define who you are when you're awake. And if you're seeking strength, calm, and control, not as a fantasy but as a lived experience, it doesn't start with a productivity hack. It starts with what the Stoics knew, that how you end your day is how you build your life. And the thoughts you fall asleep with, they don't just disappear, they become your reality. It's not always the long hours or endless to-do lists that leave us drained. It's the emotional clutter we carry, quiet, invisible, but heavy. Most people go to bed believing they're just physically tired, but what they're really experiencing is the weight of unspoken frustration, unresolved conversations, and lingering disappointments, the kind of exhaustion that no amount of sleep can fix. The Stoics understood this centuries ago. They knew that true fatigue begins in the mind, not the muscles. And yet today, we rarely think to ask ourselves what emotional baggage we're dragging into the night or how it's silently shaping the way we wake up. You might have noticed it yourself. You sleep for 8 hours but wake up feeling like you haven't rested at all. That's not just poor sleep hygiene. It's the residue of thoughts that were never sorted, emotions that were never released. Aristotle believed that moderation and balance were the key to a well-lived life. But emotional imbalance, especially when ignored, accumulates like noise in the background. A single moment of irritation left unaddressed turns into hours of internal replays. A small failure, instead of being let go, morphs into a self-judgment loop that runs even in your dreams. Think about how much space these emotions take up. You replay a disagreement from earlier, analyzing what you should have said. You anticipate a meeting tomorrow with dread, rehearsing worst-case scenarios in your head. These thoughts aren't productive, but they feel urgent. That's the trap. They masquerade as necessary planning, but they're really just emotional clutter disguised as preparation. Carl Jung warned us that what you resist not only persists but grows. When we don't acknowledge and release emotional weight, it doesn't go away, it compounds. And here's where it gets dangerous. Emotional clutter doesn't just make you tired. It changes your perception. You become more reactive, more defensive, less creative. The mind, when overloaded with unresolved emotion, starts interpreting even neutral situations through a lens of stress. A simple email feels like a personal attack. A quiet room feels like loneliness. You lose your ability to respond calmly because the internal space needed for clarity is already crowded. Seneca said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." And this is the perfect example. Emotional clutter creates imaginary battles and then convinces you they're real. Sleep is supposed to be a reset, a full system reboot. But for many, it becomes just another arena where the day's emotions continue to fight for attention. The brain doesn't shut off at night. It processes, it replays, and it sorts through everything you didn't resolve during the day. That's why going to bed without clearing emotional residue leads to vivid dreams, restlessness, and waking up already in a mental fog. The Stoics would say this is preventable, but only if you're willing to do the work. Not complicated work, but intentional. A few minutes of genuine self-reflection, a quiet moment to ask, what am I holding on to that I don't need to carry anymore? This is not about suppressing emotions. It's about detaching from them with clarity. There's a difference between feeling something and being consumed by it. The Stoics didn't believe in pretending life was always calm. They faced pain, loss, and uncertainty with open eyes, but they trained their minds not to hold on to what couldn't be controlled. They believed that emotional discipline wasn't cold. It was courageous. Letting go doesn't mean you're numb. It means you've chosen peace over chaos, clarity over clutter, and don't underestimate how fast emotional clutter builds. It doesn't take major life events. It builds from the little things. A moment of self-doubt, a comment from someone that landed wrong, a task you didn't finish and now feel guilty about. Left unchecked, these stack up silently until the weight becomes unbearable. But because we're used to this internal noise, we normalize it. We tell ourselves it's just stress. It's just life, but it isn't. It's accumulated, unattended emotional energy that hasn't been processed or released. This is why the Stoics emphasized daily mental hygiene. Just as you wash your face and brush your teeth, they believed in cleansing the mind. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say or think or do, only what you do." That tranquility doesn't appear by accident. It's a result of intentional clearing every night before the clutter turns into fatigue, burnout, or emotional numbness. You don't need an hour. You don't need a ritual with candles and soft music. You need awareness. You need honesty. You need to be willing to sit with your thoughts and feel what needs to be felt, and then release what no longer serves a purpose. Ask yourself, did anything today make me feel small, angry, insecure, or ashamed? Not to dwell, but to identify. Because the moment you name it, you give yourself the power to release it. This practice becomes even more important when life feels overwhelming. When everything's moving fast, emotional clutter builds even faster. That's when stillness becomes not a luxury but a necessity. You won't find stillness by accident. You have to create it. And the best time to do that is right before sleep, when your mind is most vulnerable to suggestion, most open to transformation. The same way you don't go to bed with dirty clothes. Don't go to bed with a dirty mind cluttered with thoughts that steal your peace. Emotional clarity is a form of strength. And like any strength, it's built in small moments. Choosing not to replay that insult. Choosing not to carry that insecurity. Choosing not to give power to a fear that hasn't even materialized. Every choice you make before bed either adds to the clutter or clears it. And the beautiful part is, you don't need to fix everything before sleep. You just need to let go of the idea that you must fix everything right now. Plato taught that the first and best victory is to conquer self. Emotional clutter makes that victory impossible. It keeps you at war with yourself, with your past, with your fears. But the path to peace isn't complicated. It's choosing moment by moment to release, to not argue with reality, to not grip so tightly to things already gone. You'll know you've started this process when you stop needing to win your arguments in your head. When you stop obsessing over what they meant or how you came across, you'll start to feel lighter. Not because the world changed, but because you did. Because you've begun to understand that peace doesn't come from controlling every detail. It comes from refusing to be ruled by thoughts that only exist to exhaust you. Emotional clutter is the real source of exhaustion. Not your schedule, not your responsibilities, not even the chaos around you. It's the chaos within. And it can be cleared night after night, choice by choice, until you wake up not just rested, but free. Most people try to add more to their lives when they're feeling overwhelmed. More motivation, more productivity hacks, more goals. But what if the real answer wasn't about adding anything? What if it was about letting go? That's the heart of mental detox. And no, it's not a trendy self-help buzzword. It's a return to something deeply human, something the Stoics practiced religiously. The ability to clear the mind, not fill it. To free yourself, not fix yourself. Marcus Aurelius once said, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it." That's the key. It's not just what happens to you, it's what you carry. Letting go isn't forgetting. It's not pretending nothing happened. It's giving yourself permission to stop carrying something that's already done its damage. Think about how much you're holding on to right now. Past regrets, someone else's opinion of you, the fear of not being enough, or the pressure to be more than you are. These aren't facts. They're weights, invisible ones. But your nervous system treats them like a real burden. Your shoulders tense, your chest tightens, your sleep gets lighter. Because even when the moment has passed, the residue remains. And here's the catch. Mental clutter multiplies. One small insecurity becomes a cascade of negative thoughts. One bad interaction colors your whole day. Carl Jung warned us that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That's what letting go protects you from living under the illusion that your emotions are you. They're not. They're visitors. And just like any guest, not all of them deserve a place to stay. The process starts with awareness. You can't release what you refuse to name. That's why journaling works. Not because it magically solves your problems, but because it pulls the chaos out of your mind and puts it somewhere else. Writing is a form of detachment. It says, "This belongs to me, but it isn't me." That separation creates room, and in that room, clarity begins to form. Not dramatic, not instant, but steady and honest. The next step is acceptance. Not everything you're holding on to will come with closure. Some people won't apologize. Some situations won't make sense. Letting go doesn't mean you understand it all. It means you've decided not to let confusion or resentment run your life. Socrates believed the unexamined life wasn't worth living. But here's the mistake many people make. They examine their pain so long that they forget to release it. The goal isn't to overthink your experience. It's to understand it enough to say, I've learned what I needed to. Now it's time to move forward. A real mental detox isn't a one-time event. It's a daily choice like cleaning a room before bed. You don't wait for it to become unlivable. You maintain it little by little. A few minutes of quiet, a walk without your phone, a single page of journaling saying no when you want to please, saying yes when you're afraid. These seem small, but every one of them is a message to your mind. I'm not here to carry what doesn't serve me anymore. Letting go doesn't make you soft. It sharpens your focus. You begin to see what matters. You realize not every thought deserves your time. Not every emotion deserves a response. Not every situation requires your energy. Aristotle taught that virtue lies in the balance between extremes. Letting go is that balance between caring and obsessing, between being responsible and being self-sacrificing, between awareness and control. And there's a kind of strength that comes with releasing something painful. Not because it wasn't real, but because you're choosing peace over proof. You don't need to win the argument in your head. You don't need to justify your pain to anyone. You just need to decide that peace is more valuable than being right. That clarity is more powerful than closure, and that your mind deserves to be free. Mental detox is really about trust. Trusting that what's behind you doesn't need to be dragged forward. Trusting that your mind is more powerful when it's not crowded. Trusting that letting go isn't loss, it's liberation. And when you start doing that, even in small ways, you begin to notice something else. You breathe deeper. Your thoughts slow down. Your inner voice gets quieter. Not silent, but less chaotic. And in that quiet, something remarkable happens. You start to feel like yourself again. This is what the Stoics were after. Not a perfect life, but a peaceful one. A mind that's not always chasing, not always fighting, not always replaying, just steady, present, and free from the weight of what no longer belongs. So the next time your mind feels heavy, don't ask what you need to do. Ask what you're ready to release. That's where the real power lives. Most people go to bed thinking they need to fix something. A broken relationship, an unfinished task, a regret from earlier in the day. The mind stays active, not because there's action to take, but because it's unwilling to let the thought pass. And that's the real problem. It's not that we're thinking too much. It's that we're refusing to stop. The mind believes that if it just thinks one more time, it will finally figure everything out. But the truth is, most of the time there's nothing to solve. There's only something to release. There's a difference between reflection and rumination. Reflection is clarity. It helps you grow, understand, and move forward. Rumination, though, is a trap. It feels like you're being productive because you're thinking so intensely, but you're really just spinning in circles. Carl Jung said, "What you resist not only persists but will grow in size." The more you try to force closure with your thoughts, the more power they take. You can't force the mind to settle by adding more thought to it. Just like you can't calm a storm by shouting over the wind. The world teaches us that we must always act, always fix, always improve. But sometimes the deepest wisdom comes from doing nothing, from letting a thought rise and fall without grabbing onto it. Not every emotion needs a response. Not every problem is meant to be handled at midnight. Sleep is not the time to sort through everything. It's the time to let it float by like clouds passing through an open sky. That's not avoidance, it's wisdom. We've been conditioned to treat every thought like an emergency, something urgent, something important. But think about how many of those late-night worries still mattered the next day. Think about how often you've lost sleep over a conversation that turned out to be meaningless. That's the cycle. The mind craves control, so it tries to untangle things in the quiet hours. But the Stoics knew better. Epictetus reminded us it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. And your reaction doesn't always need to be action. Sometimes it needs to be silence, stillness, space. Letting go is not about being careless. It's about recognizing that you've done what you can. You've shown up. You've tried. You've thought about it enough. The rest that belongs to time or to someone else or to something greater than your own mind. You release it not because it's solved, but because holding on to it is doing more harm than good. Holding on robs you of rest. And when you lose rest, you lose perspective. The ability to respond calmly. The strength to carry on. The clarity to see what really matters. People often think they need more motivation, more tools, more breakthroughs. But sometimes what they really need is less noise, less pressure, less mental weight. The strongest people aren't the ones who hold on to everything. They're the ones who know when to let go. Socrates once said, "Beware the barrenness of a busy life." The same is true for the mind. A mind too busy solving everything has no room to breathe, no space to heal, no capacity to enjoy peace. Before bed, we must retrain the mind. Instead of asking, how do I fix this? Try asking, can I let this go for now? That shift in focus makes all the difference. You begin to notice that most of what keeps you up isn't the situation itself. It's your unwillingness to release it. You've made it a part of your identity. You've convinced yourself that if you stop thinking about it, it'll spiral out of control. But ironically, letting go is what brings things back into balance. Psychologically, detachment is one of the most powerful tools we have. It doesn't mean we stop caring. It means we stop carrying. Aristotle taught that the energy of the mind is the essence of life. So where's your energy going? Into loops you've already walked through 100 times. Into fears that haven't even happened. Into emotions that aren't serving any real purpose. Then maybe the bravest thing you can do tonight is simply this. Drop it, set it down, and see who you are without that weight. Even when things are unresolved, you still deserve rest. Even when the day felt like a failure, you still deserve peace. That's not weakness. That's strength. Because the person who can put down their thoughts before sleep is the person who will rise the next day stronger, more focused, more present, more prepared. Letting go doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough about your mental clarity to stop bleeding energy into what you can't control. The mind is not a machine that's meant to run all night. It's a garden. It needs time to rest, to grow, to breathe. You don't need to solve everything. You just need to trust that peace is possible even when answers aren't. And that's what the Stoics knew. That clarity isn't found in holding on tighter. It's found in releasing the grip, in walking away from the war inside your own head and saying, not tonight. It's found in the quiet discipline of surrender. And in that surrender, the mind doesn't collapse. It expands, it opens, it finds room again. And that's where peace begins. There's a reason your thoughts feel louder at night. It's not because there's more going on. It's because there's less noise, less distraction, less demand for your attention from the outside world. And in that stillness, the mind finally becomes visible. You start to notice the patterns that were running silently in the background all day. The worries, the doubts, the unspoken fears, they rise like echoes in an empty room. And here's the truth. That silence, as uncomfortable as it might feel, is your greatest opportunity. Because the mind is most impressionable in the dark. You don't train a warrior on the battlefield. You train them in quiet, in private, in repetition. The same is true for the mind. When you're not being pulled in 10 different directions, when you're not reacting to life but sitting still with it, that's when transformation happens. Carl Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." The night invites you to look in, not to escape the world, but to confront the parts of yourself that can't hide when the lights are off. The brain doesn't stop working just because the day is over. In fact, your subconscious becomes more active while you sleep. That's when it processes your emotions, your memories, your beliefs. So the thoughts you allow in those final moments before sleep don't just fade into the dark. They're carried deeper. They settle into your wiring. That's why the Stoics reflected at night, not to beat themselves up, but to program their minds on purpose. Marcus Aurelius, after ruling an empire, would sit with his journal and ask, "What did I do well? What could I have done better? What am I holding on to that needs to be released?" It wasn't ritual. It was reinforcement. Modern life makes this harder. The blue glow of a screen, the endless scroll, the background noise we call comfort. But when you strip all that away, you return to the state the Stoics mastered, conscious stillness. That moment when you can see your own mind and choose what stays. Training the mind doesn't have to be complex. It doesn't require loud affirmations or motivational speeches. Sometimes it just means sitting in silence and watching what thoughts come without trying to change them. Not reacting, just observing. That alone is practice. That alone is progress. Aristotle believed that excellence is not an act but a habit. He wasn't talking about public victories. He was talking about private discipline. The habits formed when no one's watching. And the most consistent habit we all share is sleep. Night comes whether we want it or not. The question is, what are we doing with that window? Most people use it to numb or escape. But what if you used it to rewire? What if every night was a lesson in patience, in clarity, and letting go? The mind is softest when it's tired. It resists less. It listens more. That's why it's the perfect time to speak truths into it. Not loud ones, but steady ones. Simple reminders. I've done enough today. Not everything needs to be solved right now. My peace does not depend on perfection. Over time, these statements become anchors. They catch you when you start to spiral. They replace the old scripts, the ones written in fear and shame and pressure. with something more grounded, more real. This isn't wishful thinking. It's how neural pathways are built. Psychology confirms what the Stoics practiced. Repetition rewires. The thoughts you return to most often become the default setting. And at night, your conscious filters relax. Your guard is down. That's not a weakness. It's a window. A chance to speak directly to the part of you that drives most of your actions. And what you give it in those moments becomes who you are the next morning. Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. But what he implied is this. You don't need a dramatic life to reflect. You just need a moment. And there is no better moment than the one right before sleep. When the world is quiet and you can finally hear your own thoughts clearly. That's the moment to ask yourself what you're carrying into tomorrow, what you're letting go of, what kind of mind you're choosing to build. Calm or chaotic, open or closed, reactive or resilient. Training your mind doesn't happen through force. It happens through exposure, through repeated alignment with who you truly want to be. And night is when you get to choose that without noise or distraction. So the next time your mind feels heavy when the lights go out, don't run from it. That weight, that discomfort, that's the door. Step through it. Sit with it. Speak to it with the calm authority of someone who knows they are not their thoughts. And then gently, deliberately train the mind to let go. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be present. That's how the strongest minds are built. Not in public. Not in daylight, but in the quiet dark, where every thought becomes a seed and every choice becomes a step toward who you were always meant to be. The subconscious doesn't respond to passion. It responds to patterns. It doesn't care how inspired you feel in a single moment. What it's paying attention to is what you do over and over again. And this is where most people get it wrong. They think change happens when you feel a spark, when you hear something powerful once, or when you're in the mood to improve. But your subconscious is not looking for fireworks. It's watching for consistency. Repetition is the language of the subconscious. That's why it takes root not when you shout affirmations at yourself in the mirror once, but when you quietly repeat a truth, until it becomes natural, until it no longer feels like a new belief, but a baseline. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This is what repetition does. It drags unconscious programming into the light and gives you the chance to rewrite it. Most of what you believe about yourself wasn't chosen. It was learned slowly through repetition. If you were told as a child that you weren't good enough, maybe not directly, but through small cues, repeated dismissals, subtle emotional coldness, those messages sank in. Not because they were true, but because they were frequent. The brain, especially when young or emotionally vulnerable, doesn't evaluate truth based on logic. It evaluates truth based on exposure. What it hears often it assumes must be real. This is how self-doubt is planted, and it's also how confidence can be rebuilt. When you go to bed thinking thoughts like, "I'll never be enough," or "I don't have what it takes," those aren't just passing ideas. They're instructions. They're cues to the subconscious. And the more often they're repeated, especially in the vulnerable moments before sleep, the deeper they settle. That's why replacing those with deliberate, clear, simple truths matters. Not poetic ones, not overly grand ones, just steady, believable ones. I can improve. This feeling will pass. I am learning to let go. They don't have to feel powerful right away. They just have to be repeated. Repetition doesn't care about intensity. It cares about frequency. A single emotionally charged thought might catch your attention, but a repeated thought rewires your expectations. It sets the default. It becomes the internal voice that speaks before you even realize it's speaking. That's the real power. Not the shout, but the whisper that repeats itself so often it becomes part of you. And the whisper is shaped by what you allow yourself to think when no one is watching, especially in the quiet of night. The Stoics didn't just think about virtue. They repeated their values daily. Marcus Aurelius didn't wait until things fell apart to remind himself of what mattered. He wrote down the same truths again and again about impermanence, about control, about responsibility. Why? Because he understood that a single insight, no matter how profound, won't stand against daily stress unless it's reinforced. As Epictetus put it, first say to yourself what you would be and then do what you have to do. Saying it once is not enough. You have to say it every day. This isn't about blind repetition. It's not about forcing yourself to believe something that isn't aligned with reality. It's about choosing thoughts that serve you and reinforcing them until your subconscious takes over. Think about it. How did you learn to walk or drive or even speak your native language? Through countless tiny repeated movements, mistakes were made. Corrections followed. But over time, the brain said, "Okay, I get it. I'll take it from here." The same process applies to emotional discipline, to clarity, to calm. When you repeat thoughts like, "I can't handle this," or "this always happens to me," your subconscious begins to shape your actions, your tone, your posture to match that story. But when you consistently offer it a new script, "I'm adapting. I've made it through worse. Not everything needs a reaction." You're not just speaking differently, you're building new wiring. And over time, your emotional responses begin to change without you forcing it. Plato wrote, "The first and best victory is to conquer self." But how is that done? Through consistent mental training, through replacing chaos with structure one small moment at a time. And repetition is the tool, the quiet ritual of saying the same thing again and again and again, until it no longer feels like an effort, until it feels like you. That's how people become grounded. Not by chasing peak emotions, but by choosing a message and returning to it until it sticks. This is why the moments before sleep matter so much. It's the window where the mind is no longer distracted, no longer resisting. It's soft, open, and if you feed it fear, it will rehearse anxiety while you sleep. But if you feed it discipline softly, gently with repetition, it will begin to trust that discipline. It will make it the default. So when you wake up and the challenges come, you're not scrambling to remember how to think. You're already thinking from a stronger foundation. Repetition is how belief becomes identity. Not just what you think, but who you are. And this works both ways. If you're not choosing your repeated thoughts, someone else's algorithms, headlines, unhealed pasts, they all want to offer their scripts. And they'll succeed if you don't interrupt them with your own. That's not paranoia. That's awareness. And that awareness is your power. So keep it simple. Choose a few truths that you want to embody, not ones that hype you up for a moment, but ones that center you for a lifetime. Write them, speak them, whisper them before sleep, repeat them in the morning, and do it again the next day, because the subconscious doesn't need to be yelled at. It just needs to know you're serious. And seriousness in the world of the mind is measured by repetition. Over time, what you repeat becomes what you expect. What you expect shapes what you notice, and what you notice begins to form your experience of life. So don't underestimate the quiet power of a simple truth repeated often. That's how the inner world is reprogrammed. That's how the unshakable mind is built. Not all at once, but line by line, word by word, night by night. Most people think identity is formed in the heat of action. When you're facing a challenge, stepping up, making a decision. But identity at its core is not built in those moments. It's revealed in them. The real construction happens in the quiet, in the dark, when you're not consciously trying to be anything at all. That's the paradox. You become who you are not when you're performing. But when you're at rest, when your defenses are down, your conscious mind is still, and all that's left is the story you've silently repeated to yourself 1,000 times. That's the blueprint your subconscious keeps building from. Carl Jung said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And that's exactly why the nighttime matters. Because at night, when there's no one to impress, no noise to distract, you come face to face with the version of yourself you've created without even knowing it. What you believe about yourself when nobody's watching is what truly defines you. It's not the polished words or the conscious affirmations. It's the internal voice that speaks when you're too tired to pretend. The hours before you fall asleep are not passive. They are formative. Your brain doesn't just shut off. It reorganizes. It reviews. It encodes. And the thoughts that linger, especially those repeated in emotional tones, get tagged as important. That's how identity gets reinforced. If you go to bed every night thinking, "I'm falling behind" or "I'm not enough," that's not just a mood. It becomes a filter through which your brain starts to process everything. And before long, those thoughts aren't just ideas. They become assumptions, and assumptions turn into identity. Aristotle believed that we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act but a habit. He was talking about behavior, but it applies even more deeply to the internal world. What you repeatedly think, especially when your guard is down, becomes who you are without thinking. That's identity. It's not just what you do when the spotlight is on. It's what your mind rehearses in the quiet. It's the story you fall asleep to and the one that wakes up with you the next day. And that's the problem. Most people never question those stories. They never realize that the voice in their head at night isn't their truth. It's their programming. It's their past echoing back at them. It's the tone of a critical parent, a bitter teacher, a lost relationship, a failure that left a scar. And if you don't interrupt that voice, if you don't offer your mind a new pattern to follow, it will keep building your identity from old wounds. That's why nighttime isn't just rest. It's rehearsal. Your subconscious replays what it knows, what it hears most often, what it assumes must matter. And if you're not careful, you'll end up living a life that isn't even yours. One shaped by insecurity instead of clarity, by survival instead of purpose. That's not who you really are. That's who you became when you stopped paying attention. Socrates once said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." That doesn't mean you need to overanalyze every thought, but it does mean you need to be intentional about what you let repeat, especially at night. Because repetition is how identity is formed, and nighttime is when repetition is most powerful. This is why rituals matter. Not grand ones, simple ones, reading something meaningful, reflecting on a Stoic principle, whispering a truth you want to believe even if you don't fully feel it yet. I am not my past. I have the power to choose again. Tomorrow is not yesterday. These aren't magical phrases. They're anchors. They pull you toward a new identity one thought at a time. Think of your subconscious like a garden. Every thought before bed is a seed. You don't see the roots forming, but you wake up with new habits, new reactions, new expectations. That's how identity works. It's not forced into place. It grows into place slowly, repeatedly, quietly, and it starts when you're not awake. So if you've been waking up feeling off, out of alignment, disconnected, discouraged, it's not because you're weak. It's because your identity has been hijacked by unchecked thoughts. You're not broken. You're just rehearsing the wrong script. And the good news is it's not permanent. The brain is plastic. The mind is flexible. Identity can be reformed, but not through noise, not through force, through presence, through choice, through consistent inner work that starts not when the alarm goes off, but when the lights go out. So tonight, as you lay down and your conscious mind begins to drift, remember this. Who you become is shaped less by what you try to do, and more by what you allow yourself to believe. The beliefs that are most powerful are the ones you don't question. So choose carefully. Choose with care, because identity is not who you say you are. It's what your subconscious believes when you're asleep. And that belief is built night after night by the thoughts you let in before the world goes quiet. Most people fall asleep with noise, scrolling background shows, cluttered conversations, the endless hum of unresolved worries. It feels normal, harmless even. But that noise doesn't disappear when you close your eyes. It settles in. It leaks into your dreams. It shapes how you feel when you wake up. What's overlooked is that the mind doesn't need more distraction to find peace. It needs clarity. And clarity doesn't come from noise. It comes from depth, from stillness, from philosophy. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." If you fall asleep to chaos, your soul learns chaos. If you fall asleep to wisdom, your soul learns order. That's not poetic exaggeration. That's how neuroplasticity works. Your brain is always listening, always learning, especially when it's winding down. That's why what you feed it in the final hour before sleep matters more than what you do in the first hour after you wake. We've made the mistake of thinking sleep is just recovery for the body. But it's more than that. It's rehearsal for the mind. The thoughts you carry into sleep sink deeper than the ones you repeat during the day. At night, your conscious resistance fades, and whatever thoughts are present, the mind absorbs without a fight. That's why people who fall asleep to worry wake up anxious. That's why those who fall asleep angry wake up already on edge. What you go to bed with, you wake up in. So what if you replace the noise with something stronger, something steadier? What if instead of a random real or anxious loop, you let Epictetus or Seneca or Aurelius speak to you before bed? Not to impress you, but to prepare you. Because that's what philosophy really is. Not a subject, not a theory, a training ground, a mirror, a filter for your thoughts. Philosophy isn't about being smart. It's about being stable. The Stoics weren't obsessed with abstract ideas. They were obsessed with control. Not of the outside world, but of the self. They knew that life would throw chaos at you. But they also knew that if your inner world was trained to stay anchored, chaos wouldn't matter. That's why they wrote. That's why they reflected. That's why they asked the hardest questions in the quiet hours, so they could remain unmoved when the storm came. Plato believed that the part of the soul which desires truth and wisdom must rule. But in most people, that part of the soul is buried under layers of entertainment, bitterness, and worry. And the only way to bring it back to the surface is by feeding it consistently. Not with junk, but with truth, with depth, with ideas that challenge you instead of numb you. This is not about becoming emotionless. It's about becoming unshakable. When you end your day with philosophy, you're not trying to be perfect. You're reminding yourself of what you value. You're choosing perspective. You're placing your attention where it serves you instead of where it drains you. And that choice made consistently becomes a mindset. That mindset becomes a habit. And that habit forms the foundation of how you experience life itself. Think about this. If someone told you that every night you had the chance to train your mind to be calmer, more focused, more resilient just by what you listen to or reflect on before bed, wouldn't you take that seriously? Because that's the truth. You don't need more apps. You don't need more hacks. You need fewer distractions and more wisdom. You need less noise and more nourishment. Aristotle once said, "It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it." That's what philosophy teaches you. To entertain ideas that stretch you, to explore thoughts without being consumed by them, to pause instead of react, to reflect instead of spiral. When you end your day with these kinds of thoughts, your mind doesn't just rest, it resets, and that reset changes everything. You begin to notice the noise around you during the day. You start to reject what doesn't serve your peace. You stop feeding your anxiety out of habit, not because someone told you to, but because your inner world has changed. That change didn't come from effort. It came from attention, from what you gave your mind at the end of the day. It's subtle, but it's powerful. The way you think right before bed writes the code for how you live when you wake. So feed your mind what it needs, not what it craves. Replace gossip with wisdom. Replace judgment with clarity. Replace scrolling with stillness. Replace noise with philosophy, and you'll stop waking up tired and start waking up strong. Because in the end, the strongest minds aren't built in daylight. They're shaped in darkness, in silence, in reflection when no one's watching. And if you learn to master that space, if you learn to feed it with strength, you'll carry that strength with you into everything you do. The subconscious doesn't argue with you. It doesn't question your beliefs. It doesn't analyze what's helpful or harmful. It doesn't have the luxury of discernment the way your conscious mind does. It simply takes in what you give it repeatedly, consistently, and without filter. That's why it's so powerful and why it's also so dangerous if left unattended. It becomes what you feed it. That's not a metaphor. That's how it functions. When Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate," he wasn't being poetic. He was describing the exact mechanism of how people sabotage their own peace without realizing it. The subconscious stores every experience, every emotion, every repeated thought. But more importantly, it turns those thoughts into default responses, into emotional reactions, into internal narratives that run in the background of your life. This is why a person who constantly worries doesn't need a reason to worry. The subconscious has already learned that worry is the baseline, so it builds a reality that justifies it. That person wakes up tense, reacts quickly, and doubts themselves, not because of what's happening around them, but because of what's been rehearsed within them over and over again without interruption. Your mind is listening long after you've stopped paying attention. And at night, when your conscious guard is lowered, when the distractions fall away, that's when the subconscious is most active. That's when it starts sorting, integrating, reinforcing. But if what you've given it all day is noise, conflict, fear, or anger, then that's what it uses to build your internal world. It doesn't push back. It doesn't protect you. It simply absorbs. And what's absorbed becomes belief. It becomes identity. That's how someone can slowly begin to believe they're not enough, even if no one ever told them that directly. A look, a comment, a mistake, if rehearsed enough, can become a foundational belief about the self. The subconscious doesn't ask for evidence. It doesn't care about truth. It cares about repetition. That's why intention is everything. If you don't choose what your mind focuses on, your environment will choose for you, and your subconscious will build from that. It will take the fear you felt while scrolling the news, the comparison you felt on social media, the shame from a conversation earlier, and it will integrate all of it as if it's true, not because it wants to, but because you didn't give it anything better. You can't expect to feel calm when your subconscious has been trained in chaos. You can't expect confidence if your nightly routine is built around self-judgment, and you can't expect to wake up strong if your mind went to sleep full of confusion. Aristotle taught that we are what we repeatedly do, but it's deeper than doing. We are what we repeatedly believe, and belief is born in the subconscious. Think about how children absorb the world. They don't filter their experiences. They believe what they hear. They absorb tone, mood, meaning even when they can't put it into words. Adults aren't much different. The subconscious is always listening, even when you're not aware of it, especially in silence, especially in solitude, especially at night. That's why what you consume, what you reflect on, what you listen to, what you say to yourself before bed carries so much weight, and that's also where the power lies. Because if you can shape your subconscious through repetition, then you can shape your reality the same way. You don't need a dramatic moment of change. You need consistent, deliberate repetition of better thoughts, of wiser ideas, of words that ground you instead of rattle you. The subconscious doesn't discriminate. That's the bad news and the good news. It means the damage can be done, but it also means it can be undone. The Stoics didn't write because they had extra time. They wrote because they understood the human tendency to drift. They knew the subconscious needed to be trained not once but daily. They reinforced the same principles over and over again. You have power over your mind. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. He didn't write that once and move on. He returned to it again and again because he knew that the mind forgets and the subconscious needs reminders. You don't need a complete overhaul. You need conscious input. One idea repeated enough times becomes a belief. One truth quietly reinforced every night becomes a worldview. The subconscious doesn't care if it comes from your deepest wisdom or your worst insecurity. It will turn it into reality either way. That's why replacing noise with strength isn't just a nice idea. It's survival. It's strategy. It's how you build a foundation that can't be shaken by daily stress or emotional storms, because your reactions, your moods, your confidence, it's all rooted in what your subconscious has come to accept as truth. The mind can't serve two masters. If you feed it fear all day and try to meditate for 5 minutes at night, guess which one it will believe. If you fill it with complaints, with judgment, with unresolved emotion, and expect peace, it won't come. Not because you don't deserve peace, but because peace was never given the space to take root. The subconscious will follow the stronger voice, and the stronger voice is always the one you repeat. So give it a better voice. Feed it clarity. Give it stillness. Offer it a mindset rooted in reason, discipline, and truth. Not just for show, but because it matters. Because the thoughts you speak to yourself in the dark will echo through every decision you make in the light. And if you take that seriously, if you guide your subconscious instead of letting it wander, you'll begin to see the difference. Not immediately, but inevitably. There is no secret to transformation. There is no hack. There's just repetition. There's just what you allow your mind to believe when you're not paying attention. That's what shapes everything. The subconscious doesn't judge. It just absorbs. So be careful what you give it, and be even more intentional about what you repeat. Because that's not just the story you're telling yourself, it's the life you're building. When you go to bed in conflict, you don't leave the war behind. You carry it into your dreams, into your body, into the rhythm of your breath. You may think sleep will give you peace, but it doesn't. Not when your nervous system is still alert, your heart still guarded, your mind still spinning over what was said, what should have been said, and what you wish you could take back. The body rests, but the mind continues the argument in silence. And that silent argument, it doesn't heal, it hardens. What begins as a small disagreement furs overnight into a story. And stories have power. The subconscious doesn't distinguish between what's happening now and what's being replayed mentally. So if you lie in bed revisiting a painful conversation, that pain embeds itself deeper, not just as memory, but as identity. You start seeing yourself through the lens of that moment, angry, betrayed, misunderstood, defensive, and the next morning you don't wake up fresh. You wake up with a mental hangover, still wearing the emotional residue of a night lived in tension. Plato once said, "There is no greater evil one can suffer than to hate reasonable discourse." But when we sleep in conflict, we reject reason without knowing it. We let the emotional brain take control and shut out the wiser part of ourselves, the one capable of reflection, forgiveness, understanding. And the more nights we spend that way, the more disconnected we become from that inner wisdom. People often believe time will fix emotional wounds, but time doesn't heal what is constantly reopened. And every time you mentally revisit that fight, that insult, that moment of misunderstanding, you rip the wound open again. You might not speak it out loud, but your body knows. Your breath shortens, your muscles tighten, your sleep becomes shallow, you wake up tired. Not because you didn't sleep, but because the conflict never stopped. Socrates believed that the unexamined life is not worth living. But what about the over-examined conflict? When you obsessively turn something over in your head not to learn from it, but to relive it. What good does that do? It doesn't bring resolution. It doesn't create clarity. It only traps you in a loop. And your subconscious, quiet and obedient, builds that loop into a pattern. The danger here isn't just in feeling bad. It's in training your mind to seek out more conflict. You begin to expect tension. You start seeing it where it isn't. You enter conversations already defensive, interpreting neutral actions as attacks. That's how conflict becomes not just something you experience, but something you carry with you, into your relationships, into your work, into your view of yourself. Now here's the truth. Resolution isn't always possible before bed. Sometimes the other person won't pick up the phone. Sometimes the situation is too fresh, too painful. But even if peace with them isn't available, peace with yourself is. That's the choice we often forget. You can't always end the argument, but you can end the grip it has on you. That doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It means reminding yourself that the conflict is not your identity, that anger doesn't have to follow you to sleep, that your mind doesn't need to rehearse pain just because it's available. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist not only persists but will grow in size." And going to bed in conflict is a form of resistance. It's trying to outrun the discomfort instead of accepting it, processing it and releasing what you can. A wise mind doesn't need everything solved right away. It just needs space, and that space begins the moment you choose to put the story down, even if temporarily, even if just for tonight. Because every night is a chance to reset the emotional tone of your life. And if you consistently go to bed in conflict, then conflict becomes the emotional default of your days. That's the real danger. When inner tension becomes so normal that peace feels unfamiliar, you wake up ready to defend, not to connect. You live in anticipation of offense. You rehearse old arguments in your head and miss the present moment entirely. And worst of all, you forget what it feels like to rest deeply, not just physically but emotionally. The Stoics believed that our peace depends not on external events but on our response to them. Epictetus taught, "It's not what happens to you but how you react to it that matters." That lesson is never more important than at night. Because how you go to sleep isn't just a reaction to your day, it's a rehearsal for tomorrow. It programs the emotional baseline your subconscious will follow. So if you want more clarity, more energy, more strength, the starting point isn't in the morning. It's at night. It's in that quiet decision to let go just enough so that you can rest, to breathe a little deeper, to choose silence over the last word, to remind yourself that your peace is worth more than winning an argument that no one is still having except you. You're not weak for choosing peace. You're not naive for stepping away from conflict. You're wise. You're training your mind to value what truly matters. Because the more nights you spend in stillness, the more days you'll wake up grounded. And that's not just emotional healing. That's psychological strength. That's the kind of transformation that doesn't announce itself, but it changes everything. When the world goes quiet and you're left alone with your thoughts, that's when real reflection begins. But for many people, that silence is quickly polluted by guilt. Not growth, not insight, just shame disguised as thinking. We mistake overanalysis for wisdom and self-judgment for responsibility. But the truth is, guilt isn't clarity, it's noise. And until we learn to reflect without guilt, our self-re will always be colored by pain rather than understanding. There's a difference between holding yourself accountable and punishing yourself. One leads to growth, the other leads to paralysis. Yet so many of us confuse the two. We lie awake at night replaying things we said, decisions we made, moments we wish we could change. We call it reflection, but really it's rumination. We're not learning. We're looping. And that loop keeps us stuck in the very identity we're trying to outgrow. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Guilt operates in the unconscious. It shapes the lens through which we examine ourselves. It whispers, "You're not good enough," even when we're doing our best. And if we let that voice go unchecked, our self-reflection turns into self-attack. We become afraid to look honestly at ourselves because we know what's waiting. There isn't clarity. It's condemnation. But real reflection isn't about proving you're bad. It's about understanding where you were unconscious and deciding what you want to do with that awareness. It's not about tearing yourself down. It's about tuning into what you were blind to before. It's about catching your patterns with compassion, not a whip. Because change doesn't come from shame. It comes from truth paired with grace. When you sit in quiet review of your day, the question isn't, what did I mess up? The question is, where was I unaware? Where was I reactive? Where did I ignore my values? That shift changes everything. It opens the door to responsibility without self-abuse, and it lets you move forward with power instead of dragging the past like a chain. Socrates said an unexamined life is not worth living. But he didn't say shame yourself into becoming better. Self-inquiry was his path to wisdom, but it was also his path to freedom. To see clearly, we have to stop moralizing our mistakes. Stop attaching our worth to every error. You made a choice with the awareness you had. Now you have more. That's growth. That's evolution. So why is guilt so addictive? Because it feels like action. It feels like penance, but it's hollow. It doesn't move energy. It just recycles it. It traps you in a version of yourself that you've already outgrown, and that trap is reinforced every night you go to bed, mentally punishing yourself for being human. The Stoics understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change, for I seek the truth which never harmed anyone." That's the spirit of honest reflection. Not shame, but correction, not judgment, but openness to improvement. You look at yourself not to feel small, but to grow stronger. Night is a sacred time for this kind of review. Your distractions are down. The external world isn't screaming for your attention. You have a rare opportunity to face yourself with honesty, but that moment becomes toxic if guilt takes over the space. If instead of learning, you're labeling. If instead of evolving, you're hiding behind blame. So how do you shift? Start by talking to yourself like someone you want to see win. Use language that opens you instead of closing you. Instead of, "I was such an idiot," say, "I see where I lost awareness." Instead of, "Why do I always do this?" Ask what triggered that response today. That shift in tone rewires the entire review process. It allows you to examine your day without shrinking from it. Aristotle believed that excellence is not an act but a habit. But habits aren't built in guilt. They're built in awareness. And awareness is something you can grow every night if you let go of the belief that you have to be perfect to be worthy. You don't. You just have to be honest. And honesty thrives in a space that's safe, not self-critical. Let your nightly reflection become a ritual of strength. Let it be the time you meet yourself as a student of your own behavior, not the prosecutor of your flaws. Because when you do that, something powerful happens. Your past stops defining you. Your mistakes stop haunting you. And your mind becomes a place you trust. Again, the goal isn't to ignore what went wrong. It's to approach it with curiosity instead of shame. To ask, what did this moment teach me? Rather than, how could I be so stupid? One creates wisdom. The other creates wounds. And maybe that's what we've forgotten in our rush to be better. That growth isn't about being hard on ourselves. It's about being honest enough to see where we need to shift and kind enough to believe we can. So as you lie in bed tonight, review your day like a philosopher, not a critic. See your missteps as signals, not as signs of failure. You don't need to be flawless. You need to be aware, because awareness changes behavior, and behavior repeated becomes identity. That's how you become someone new. Not through guilt, but through conscious self-respect. This is the essence of Stoicism. Not coldness, not perfection, but the courage to face yourself each night and say, here's where I can do better, and I will. Without drama, without shame, just truth and the will to rise again tomorrow. Detachment is often misunderstood. People hear the word and think of distance, coldness, indifference, as if to be detached means to stop caring. But in truth, detachment isn't the absence of feeling. It's the presence of power. Real detachment is when you feel deeply, but your emotions no longer own you. You see clearly, but you're no longer controlled by what you see. You don't shut down, you simply rise above. Stoicism has always taught this distinction. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Detachment is that strength. It's not suppression, it's sovereignty. It means you don't need things to go your way in order to remain steady. You don't collapse when others misunderstand you. You don't chase validation. You don't beg for certainty. You let the world be what it is and you choose how to respond. This kind of discipline doesn't come from rejecting life. It comes from understanding it. The Stoics didn't run from experience. They simply refused to let experience shake their inner foundation. They felt everything but stayed rooted in reason. That's what made them immovable. Not because they avoided emotion, but because they knew emotion didn't have the final word. We live in a time where emotional reactivity is glorified, where being loud about your pain is mistaken for healing, where attachment is labeled as love and detachment is seen as weakness. But ask yourself, what's stronger? Being consumed by everything that happens to you, or being able to witness it all without losing your grip? Plato said the first and greatest victory is to conquer yourself. Detachment is that victory. It doesn't mean you don't feel betrayal. It means betrayal no longer defines your sense of self. It doesn't mean you don't experience disappointment. It means disappointment doesn't poison your direction. Detachment doesn't make you less human. It makes you more stable. Think about how you react when things fall apart. Do you immediately spiral into blame, resentment, panic, or can you pause, observe, respond with clarity instead of chaos? That pause is detachment. That breath between impulse and action. That's where your command lives. And yet, detachment is not passive. It's not apathy in disguise. It requires immense attention. You have to be able to see your thoughts without getting tangled in them. You have to feel your emotions without collapsing into them. You have to witness people's behavior without instantly personalizing it. That's not weakness. That's mastery. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Detachment is how we make the unconscious conscious. It's how we stop reacting from old wounds and start choosing from awareness. It's how we shift from being pulled by life to walking through it with intention. And the mind learns this discipline most easily when everything else is quiet. At night, when your body slows and your outer distractions fade, you have the perfect opportunity to practice detachment. Not by turning away from your thoughts, but by watching them without grabbing hold. Not by silencing your emotions, but by seeing them as waves that pass. Not truths that trap. This is why sleep is so powerful. Because it doesn't just rest the body, it reveals the mind. And when you go to bed practicing detachment, your subconscious learns to stop clinging, to stop rehearsing arguments, to stop solving problems that don't need to be solved. You teach your system that not everything requires a reaction, that sometimes stillness is strength. Aristotle taught that we are what we repeatedly do. So if every night you teach yourself to witness your inner world without being consumed by it, you become someone who carries peace into the next day. You don't have to fake calm anymore. You become it. Because detachment isn't pretending nothing matters. It's realizing that not everything deserves your energy. Think about how much weight you carry. Other people's expectations, your past mistakes, future fears, daily stress. All of it pressing on your nervous system like invisible bricks. Detachment lets you set that weight down. Not because it doesn't exist, but because carrying it constantly doesn't make you stronger. It just makes you tired. When you truly understand this, you stop arguing with reality. You stop clinging to what hurt you. You stop chasing people who left. You stop needing every situation to be fair or every person to understand. You realize that your peace isn't found in control. It's found in clarity, and that clarity is what detachment gives you. So no, detachment is not cold. It's the fire of restraint in a world obsessed with noise. It's what allows you to be present without being pulled apart. To feel deeply and still remain centered, to care without craving, to love without losing yourself. Because the real goal isn't to harden. It's to soften so deeply into your own being that nothing external can pull you off balance. That's what the Stoics understood. That's what you can train your mind to do every single night. Not through force, but through focus. Not through resistance, but through letting go. Detachment isn't rejection. It's redirection. Away from chaos toward calm. Away from emotional dependence toward inner command. That is not coldness. That is power. You've been told that closure is what brings peace. That until you get the apology, the explanation, the conversation that never happened, you'll be stuck. But what if that belief is the very thing keeping you trapped? What if waiting for closure is just another way the mind delays healing? The truth is, closure is rarely something someone else can give you. More often, it's something you decide. You don't need someone to validate your pain in order to release it. You don't need all the answers before you can sleep in peace. Because sometimes the answer is silence and learning to rest in silence. That's real strength. We think that closure means getting the story to make sense. But not everything will. Some people leave mid-sentence. Some situations end without justice. Some truths remain hidden. And some wounds never get the explanation they deserved. But life doesn't pause until we get closure. The mind, however, will try to. It will loop the memories, replay the moment, revisit the words over and over like a broken record, as if running the scene again will rewrite the ending, but all it does is keep you anchored to the pain. Carl Jung once wrote, "What you resist not only persists but will grow in size." That applies here. The more you demand closure from others, the more power you give to something outside yourself. And ironically, that very powerlessness is what steals your sleep. Because how do you rest when your peace depends on someone else doing what they've already proven they won't do? Real closure doesn't come when they finally explain themselves. It comes when you stop needing them to. It comes when you realize that understanding why someone hurt you doesn't always make it hurt less. That even if you got the apology, it wouldn't rewind the pain. That healing isn't a perfect puzzle where everything gets resolved. It's a choice to stop bleeding into your future from a wound that can no longer be changed. Socrates said, "Beware the barrenness of a busy life." That includes a mentally busy life, one where your mind never rests because it's chasing something it doesn't need. Closure becomes a phantom. You reach for it, but it's never quite there. And yet if you pause, if you stop running the mental scripts, you'll realize something powerful. You already have everything you need to put it down. When you're lying awake thinking about what they should have said or what you should have done differently, ask yourself, what do I really want from this thought? Most of the time, it's reassurance. Reassurance that you were enough, that you were right, that what happened to you wasn't fair. But you don't need a replay to know your worth, and you don't need fairness to choose rest. Rest doesn't come from fixing the past. It comes from no longer needing to. It comes from seeing your pain and not trying to edit it, from facing the gap and not needing to fill it, from accepting that you may never fully understand why, but that understanding was never the requirement for moving forward. Aristotle believed that excellence is a habit, not a single act. And one of the greatest habits you can build is the habit of emotional closure internally. That means making peace with unfinished stories, with unanswered questions, with people who don't know how to love you, right? It means saying to yourself, I see it, I accept it, and I won't carry it any further. You can train your mind to do this every night. You can give yourself closure by ending the mental argument, by breathing through the urge to rewind, by choosing stillness over resolution, because often it's the clinging that keeps the wound open, not the event itself. The Stoics never waited for closure. They waited for nothing. Epictetus taught, freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control, and closure when demanded from others lies squarely beyond your control. You don't need them to make it right. You only need to stop making it yours to fix. This doesn't mean you pretend it didn't happen, or that it didn't affect you. It means you honor what it did, but you refuse to be defined by it. It means you stop tying your healing to someone else's awakening. You grieve, you feel, you learn, but then you release. Because at some point, it's not about the past. It's about your nervous system. Your mind can't recharge if it's carrying conflict every night into sleep, if it's holding its breath waiting for resolution. Rest is a decision you choose to release. Not because they deserved forgiveness, but because you deserve peace. Think about it. The people who wronged you, they're not losing sleep over it. The past isn't lying awake with you, but you are. You're the one reliving, rethinking, reattaching. Closure is what you give yourself when you finally decide to stop needing the pain to make sense. When you stop asking, why did this happen, and start asking, what can I choose now? That's where your power is, not in the answer, but in the choice. You can choose to put down the thought. You can choose to rest, not because everything is resolved, but because you're done letting the unresolved run your life. That's what the mind learns when you stop feeding it unfinished business before bed. That's when it learns that freedom isn't found in clarity. It's found in release. And when you do this regularly, night after night, something shifts. Your brain begins to heal because it finally has room to your emotions begin to calm, because they're no longer being stirred by what-ifs. You don't just sleep. You renew because you're no longer clinging to an ending that was never yours to write. Closure isn't found in the past. It's created in the present. It's not a gift. It's a boundary. It says this ends here. Not because everything's perfect, but because I'm ready to be free. And that freedom, that's what lets you rest. We avoid it all day long. We distract ourselves with to-do lists. We numb it with screens. We hide from it in the illusion of control. But when the lights go out and the world quiets down, one truth still hums beneath the surface. You won't be here forever. And though most people fear that thought, the Stoics saw it differently. For them, it wasn't morbid. It was clarifying. It wasn't a threat. It was a mirror. Marcus Aurelius wrote, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think. That's not a suggestion to live in fear. It's an invitation to live in focus. Because when you carry the weight of mortality with you, not as panic, but as perspective, you begin to shed everything that doesn't matter. And when you allow that awareness to guide you into sleep, something powerful happens. The mind stops chasing noise and starts organizing truth. Mortality is the ultimate anchor. It strips away false urgency and reveals what's actually urgent: peace, purpose, presence. And oddly enough, it's at night when we're most vulnerable that this realization creeps in the loudest. That's why so many people feel uneasy before bed. It's not just overthinking. It's the quiet arrival of mortality reminding us you're temporary. What are you doing with that? Now, most people fight this. They push it away with distractions, scrolling, talking, planning, worrying. But the Stoic mind does something else. It listens. It allows mortality to shape the evening, not sabotage it. And that shaping, it sharpens. Because when you truly understand that this might be your last night and one day it will be, you begin to treat your inner world differently. You stop wasting energy on petty conflict. You stop giving your mind to bitterness, to unresolved drama, to imagined futures. Mortality makes the mind minimal. It trims the excess. You fall asleep not with clutter but with clarity. And in that clarity you become stronger. You become clean. Because a mind that remembers it's mortal is a mind that values each moment of rest as sacred, not sloppy. Carl Jung once said, "A man who is unconscious of the laws of his own being is at the mercy of chance." But mortality makes you conscious. It brings urgency not to external things but to your internal state. It doesn't rush your actions. It refines your attention. Suddenly, the things you were obsessing about feel lighter, not because they're solved, but because they're put in their place. Mortality puts everything in its place. That's why the hours before sleep are so important. They're not just a time to wind down. They're a time to recalibrate. They're the quiet arena where the truth of your life catches up to you. And instead of fearing that, you can welcome it. You can let that hum of impermanence silence the noise. Because what matters comes forward and what doesn't fades. Plato believed that philosophy was a preparation for death. Not in the sense of morbidity but mastery. He saw contemplation of mortality as the path to higher living. And what is sleep if not a nightly rehearsal of letting go? Each time we close our eyes, we're practicing surrender. And that surrender becomes meaningful when it's tied to purpose, when it's done with awareness. When we fall asleep, not trying to escape life, but aligning ourselves with its truth. This is why rituals matter, not for superstition, but for attention. When you set aside a few minutes before bed to reflect, to breathe, to check in with what actually matters, you're not just relaxing, you're sharpening. You're turning the mind from reactive to reflective. You're becoming the kind of person who doesn't waste time chasing what doesn't feed the soul. And if you've ever laid awake feeling haunted by a strange sense of urgency, like you should be doing more, becoming more, understand this. That's not anxiety. That's the part of you waking up to life. The discomfort isn't a problem. It's a pointer. It means your mind knows there's more that you don't have forever. And that realization, when respected, can become a compass, not a burden. Seneca once wrote, "Let us prepare our minds as if we'd come to the very end of life. Let us postpone nothing. Postpone nothing. Not peace, not presence, not inner work. The day you stop postponing is the day you start living. And that kind of mindset, when practiced nightly, shapes everything. It makes you more compassionate, more focused, less reactive, because you're no longer fooled into thinking you have unlimited chances. And here's the paradox. When you carry mortality into sleep, you don't become heavy, you become light. Because you stop carrying things that don't matter. You stop mentally packing for a future you may never meet. You stop wasting your last conscious moments of the day on fear, resentment, or regret. Instead, you rest with your soul intact. The Stoics never said, "Don't feel." They said, "Feel with purpose." They said, "Choose the thoughts you fall asleep with like you choose the final words of your day." Because those words echo. They seep into the subconscious. They become your morning mindset. And the mind that remembers death each night doesn't panic. It prioritizes. So let this thought walk with you into sleep. If this were your last night, would these thoughts deserve to be your last ones? If the answer is no, change the script. You can right now, you can shift from noise to stillness, from grasping to grace, from fear to freedom. Because the greatest clarity doesn't come from overthinking. It comes from remembering what actually matters. When you allow mortality to sit quietly beside you at night, not as a threat but as a teacher, you begin to sleep like a philosopher. You close your eyes not to forget life but to absorb it more fully. You don't just rest, you reset. You don't just recover, you return to the core of what matters. And that's how a Stoic sleeps, not with denial, not with distraction, but with the humble power of someone who knows the clock is ticking and is grateful enough to make peace with the silence. There's a big difference between collapsing into sleep and surrendering to it with strength. Most people end the day by shutting down, not learning, not reflecting, just escaping. But if you let the day end you without pausing to extract anything from it, no insight, no growth, no gratitude, it means you survived but didn't evolve. You made it through, but you didn't rise through it. And over time, that quiet pattern of emotional neglect becomes something deeper, a life lived passively rather than powerfully. Stoicism wasn't designed for perfect people. It was built for real people, flawed, struggling, uncertain. And that's why it's so transformative, because it doesn't demand that your days go smoothly. It only asks that you respond to them with awareness. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." And that reaction, that response begins not in the moment of conflict, but in the moment after, when the dust settles and you're left with your thoughts. That's when the real shaping begins. We're taught to end the day by turning off. Turn off your phone, your brain, your emotions. But the Stoic path doesn't end in silence. It ends in sense-making, in synthesis, in taking what happened today and asking yourself, What part of this day will I carry into tomorrow? And what part will I leave here? That single act of reflection done consistently is what separates reactive minds from refined ones. But here's where most people get it wrong. They think reflection means overthinking, replaying arguments, rehearsing regrets. That's not reflection. That's rumination. And the difference is critical. Reflection seeks clarity. Rumination seeks control. One frees you, the other traps you. And you can feel the difference. When you reflect properly, your breath slows, your emotions soften. You're not clinging, you're cleansing. Let the day teach you, not with a lecture, but with a whisper. What drained you today? What lifted you? Who did you become even slightly because of what you faced? Most people never ask these questions. They're too tired. But the truth is they're tired because they don't ask. Because they carry every unresolved moment with them into the night. And the mind is heavy when nothing's sorted. Socrates said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." That's not an insult. It's a challenge, a wake-up call. Because if you don't examine your life, you don't own it. You don't know what's helping you, what's hurting you, what's shaping you. You're not living, you're reacting. You're not learning, you're looping. That's why night is sacred. Because it gives you the one thing the day rarely does. Space. Space to breathe, space to think, space to process without performing. And in that space there's power. Not the loud, flashy kind. The quiet, enduring kind. The kind that grows every time you choose awareness over avoidance. Even if today was hard, even if it broke you a little, it doesn't mean it was wasted. Pain doesn't make a day worthless. But ignoring the lesson inside that pain, that's the real loss. And you don't need a journal or a ritual to get the benefit. Just a moment. A willingness to listen, to ask. Not why did this happen to me, but what did this reveal in me? And if the answer is something you don't like, good. Now you know. Now you have something to work with. Because the point isn't to be perfect. It's to be present. That's what Stoicism is about. Not suppressing emotion, but transforming it. Not avoiding the hard parts of life, but extracting strength from them. And that work, real quiet internal work, starts when the noise of the world dies down. At the end of the day, you're left with yourself. And that moment when you're brushing your teeth, lying in bed, staring into the dark, that's not just routine. It's reflection time. It's where your mind decides what story it will carry forward. And if you skip that moment, if you shut down instead of tuning in, you miss the whole point. Aristotle said, "We are what we repeatedly do." But what do you repeatedly think before bed? What story do you repeatedly tell yourself? Are you feeding your mind old guilt, petty frustrations, unresolved fears? Or are you teaching it to grow, to see patterns, to recognize emotional loops, to practice letting go? Let the day teach you. Even if all it taught you is what not to repeat. Even if all it showed you is that you're still healing. Even if the only win you had was that you made it through, that's enough. Because growth doesn't always look like confidence. Sometimes it looks like honesty. Like admitting you snapped when you didn't mean to. Like noticing your envy. Like catching yourself in self-pity and choosing not to stay there. That's growth. Quiet, stoic, lasting growth. So tonight, don't let the day end you. Don't collapse under its weight. Sit with it. Look it in the eye. Let it speak to you. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to be willing to listen to what your life is trying to teach you, because in that willingness you become something rare, a person who doesn't just live through days but learns from them, a person who walks through life not with arrogance but with awareness, and that in the end is the mark of true strength. Most people wake up reacting, not thinking, not choosing, just responding like a machine programmed by yesterday's noise. The alarm goes off and their mind is already racing what they forgot, what they're behind on, what someone said or didn't say. Their feet hit the floor, but their thoughts never got a chance to align, and that's why they feel drained before the day even begins. It's not the morning that's broken, it's the programming. But when you wake up with a trained mind, everything changes. You're no longer pulled by impulses, emotions, or other people's energy. You move with clarity, with intention, not perfectly but consciously. That's a superpower in today's world, not because it's flashy, but because it's rare. And like all rare things, it's powerful not because it's loud, but because it's consistent. The Stoics understood this better than anyone. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, not to be busy, not to be validated, to be alive." That awareness alone is enough to change how you carry yourself. Because when you're truly aware of life, of your breath, your mind, your choices, you stop throwing your mornings away on autopilot. And here's where the night plays its part. A trained mind in the morning is born from what you feed it at night. Sleep doesn't erase your thoughts. It incubates them. It takes whatever mental pattern you fall asleep with and strengthens it. That's not spirituality. It's neuroscience. The subconscious brain reviews the day, encodes memory, and reinforces thought loops during rest. So if you fall asleep with worry, resentment, distraction, that's what gets rehearsed, and you'll wake up heavy, even if your body got 8 hours. But if you train the mind to settle into sleep with clarity, calm, even a hint of purpose, your subconscious gets to work shaping a foundation you'll actually want to build on. You wake up with less noise, less emotional fog, more grip, more presence, and that's a different kind of energy. Not the kind that burns hot and fast, the kind that carries you forward with steady control. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." But when you train the unconscious, when you influence it through repetition, intention, awareness, it no longer directs your life blindly. You lead it. And that's the beginning of mental freedom. There's no need for morning hacks if your mind is already grounded before sunrise. No need to jolt yourself awake with loud motivation if you've gone to sleep in alignment. A trained mind doesn't need to be forced. It flows. It's not about getting rid of hard thoughts. It's about deciding which ones deserve your attention. Because when you wake up with a trained mind, you're not just alert, you're aware. You notice your first emotion before it takes over. You hear the thought before it spirals. And in that tiny space between stimulus and response, you gain power. It's a calm kind of power, one that doesn't flinch under pressure, one that doesn't chase validation, one that doesn't fear being misunderstood. A power that comes from self-command, from knowing that your inner world sets the tone for everything else. The weather, the inbox, the news, they may still come. But your reactions, those belong to you because your mind was already trained before the world had a chance to pull you off track. This is what the modern world forgets. That discipline doesn't begin with action. It begins with thought. And not just daytime thoughts, nighttime ones too. The subtle affirmations, the quiet decisions to forgive, the unseen shift from anger to awareness, these shape your inner rhythm. And your rhythm shapes your life. So yes, waking up with a trained mind is a superpower. Not because it makes life easy, but because it makes you unshakable. You don't need a perfect routine. You need a prepared mind. One that was shaped not by panic but by peace. One that doesn't chase the world but leads itself through it. And that kind of mind, one that is still sharp and self-led, becomes your greatest tool, your anchor, your edge. Because when the world moves fast, the one who's steady wins. When everyone is loud, the one who's centered is heard. And when everything feels chaotic, the one who's trained rises not with force but with clarity. That's not magic. That's not luck. That's mental preparation. And it's built in the quiet moments, especially the ones before sleep. So that when the morning comes, you don't just wake up, you rise and you move, not with panic, but with power. The day doesn't decide who you are, you do. And it begins in the quiet when no one's watching. When the world is still, that's where strength is built. That's where peace is planted. And that's where your real power begins. So tonight, give your mind something noble to rest on. Let it carry wisdom into your sleep. And you'll wake with a mind that's not only clear, but unconquered. If you found peace in this, you'll want to watch the next video waiting on your screen. It was made to go even deeper. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of the Stoic Tide.